Today we're going to talk about chapter 1, which is the economic problem. This chapter begins by talking about how economists think. In economics, we take reality and simplify it into models that show the key characteristics of an economic phenomenon. So the real world's really messy. We make models where we make certain assumptions to simplify things and get the underpinnings of what's going on. And one of the things we do is we assume rational behavior. So, we assume people make logical choices. We know in reality that that's not always true, but we make that assumption to simplify the model and keep things tractable. Okay. So we also seek objective ways to analyze how humans act in social settings. So like if you just think of a market, there's a lot of, the things that can go on there. It can be quite complex. When we do our model of supply and demand, we make some simplifying assumptions about how buyers and sellers would behave. So in general, economics is a little different actually than many of the other courses that you learn because it's a little more abstract. We have a lot of what ifs rather than what is, and we make sort of models that simplify reality. But in doing that, we get a good framework to think about the complex behavior that we do actually see in the real world. Okay, so let's start with the economic problem. So in any society where you have human beings living, we inevitably have to at least have food and shelter. So we need to produce at least food and shelter. In a modern economy, obviously, we produce thousands or millions of different goods and services. Now, the economic problem is that we have scarce inputs. So the inputs to producing anything are natural resources. So you could think of water or any natural resource, land. We also need tools, capital. We need some kind of way to convert these things into output or services. And we need humans to actually be part of that process as well. So you could categorize the inputs to any production that a society uses into these three categories. And an economic system is what takes these things, coordinates and all of the logistics and organizes these factors of production into outputs that we want and need. Now, the problem is that the stuff on the left is obviously limited. It's scarce. Okay, we don't have unlimited, capital resources, natural resources, or human resources, but our wants seem to be unlimited. So that's sort of the issue. If our economic resources or inputs were unlimited, then we wouldn't need to be studying economics. Now, an economic system is what we're going to talk about in a moment, but an economic system is the rules and behaviors of the people in the society related to taking these inputs and making outputs. There are two extreme examples that we'll talk about, the market system, and then the other extreme example would be a command system like in Cuba or North Korea or the former Soviet Union. And in that case, the government made all of the decisions. In a market system, we indirectly make the decisions through our purchasing behavior. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's the main economic problem. Obviously, we have scarce resources and our wants and needs are unlimited. And, it's a problem that the economic system has to solve. Some economic systems are better than others. So again, these are our inputs to production. So natural resources, again, are anything related to stuff that you can make stuff with from nature, and that includes land. When we talk about capital resources, we're talking about tools used to make goods and services, buildings, anything like that, a plant, materials, real physical capital. This doesn't include financial capital. When somebody purchases a stock, that's just a transfer of ownership. Nothing was produced in that transaction. So things like that aren't included. However, the services of a stockbroker or something like that that service would be that wouldn't be capital, but we would include that in say GDP, but we'll talk about that in the macro chapter. But in terms of capital resources, what we're talking about here are physical resources, and then human resources, we're here talking about labor effort, and there's a special kind of labor effort we call entrepreneurship, and that relates to when you have someone that's owning a firm, and they're coordinating and managing and taking the risk to convert those scarce resources into output for sale. But these are the three main categories. We have stuff from the earth, tools, and labor effort. So as I said earlier, economic models simplify reality. In a lot of models, there's usually some sort of dependent variable, and then there's an independent variable. So a dependent variable would be something like quantity demanded, and then the independent variables to that would be something like the price of the good or the income levels, price of other goods, because all of those things will, changes in any of those things will result in changes in the quantity demanded of a good. And, different variables have different relationships. So they could be either inverse or direct or negative and positive, same sort of idea. For example, a demand curve has a negative slope, so it has an inverse relationship. So there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. The higher the price, the lower the quantity, and then the other way around. Whereas the supply curve has a positive relationship. The higher prices are, the more firms would be willing to sell. So an important concept in economics is this Latin term, ceteris paribus. It just means holding other things constant. So when we look at the relationship, say, between the quantity demanded of a good and its price, we want to hold constant any of the other factors that could affect quantity demanded. Basically, we're saying we like to isolate relationships and look at specific, keep things simple and look at a specific relationship and hold other things constant so that it's not confusing us, and we can get a better idea of what we're looking at. So this depends on the certain phenomenon that we're analyzing. We won't get into this too much in the course, but this chapter talks briefly about utility maximization. I'll just give you a brief overview. So utility is just a word for your satisfaction or happiness gained from consuming a good or service or any sort of action. Again, we would assume consumers are rational and that their decisions would be to maximize their own happiness or satisfaction from consuming a good. And we also assume that people generally tend to act to maximize their own welfare. Of course, this isn't always true. It depends on the models we're looking at. In some models, maybe we'll make adjustments to this. But for this course, you don't need to worry too much about it. Now, a really important concept, and this relates a lot to what we talked about earlier about the scarce resources and the economic system. The concept is called opportunity cost, and this is defined as the utility of the best foregone alternative. So whenever we make a decision to use our scarce resources, there's an opportunity cost associated with that. It's what we could have been doing, what else we could have done with those scarce resources. Even your time, if you have a free lunch, if you're offered a free lunch and you go and have a free lunch, the person pays for it, there's still an opportunity cost because your time is scarce, and your opportunity cost of that free lunch is whatever else you could have done in that time. You're never going to get that time back. So there's always an opportunity cost. So whenever we think about making any kind of a choice to use our scarce resources, we give up something. There's an opportunity cost associated with that. So there's a trade-off. So because of our resources, again, those inputs to production that we talked about, they're scarce. So because they're scarce, that forces us to make choices. And when we make choices, that involves opportunity costs. If the government decides to spend money building an Olympic stadium for the Olympics, well, the opportunity cost is that money could have been spent on maybe better education or a new hospital. Okay, because the resources that are used to build that stadium are scarce, and once you use them to build a stadium, then you can't make anything else with those resources. Does that make sense? So any decision regarding the use of resources involves benefits, obviously. So if we use our scarce resources, our labor, land, and capital to build a stadium for the Olympic Games, we get benefits. We now have a nice stadium, and the benefits of hosting the Olympics, for example, and all that. we get, but we have to give up something, and it's the opportunity cost. Those scarce resources could have been used for something else like hospital. If we already have really good hospitals, then maybe the opportunity cost isn't too high in that, but there's always going to be some opportunity cost. So you kind of want to make decisions where you're minimizing your opportunity. So let's see if you were paying attention. So we have a question here. It says, which of the following is the opportunity cost of attending college? So I'll give you a moment to think about it. Yeah, almost. So there's a lot of letter B's coming in. You're right. So money spent on clothing, well, that's not necessarily an opportunity cost of attending college, because you probably would have bought clothing anyways, right? Unless you were, say, going to a school that had a uniform and you had to buy a uniform, then the cost of that uniform, would be an opportunity cost of attending college, because if you did go to college, you wouldn't have bought that uniform. But luckily, we don't have to wear uniforms to school. And you're correct with B. Yes, foregone income from working full time would be something you give up to attend college. But of course, you're assuming that the benefits of attending college are going to outweigh the amount of income that you lost while working full time. So especially if you don't have any education and you're getting education, the amount you're going to get paid isn't going to be that much. So you're not giving up all that much, because when you have an education and then you start getting, really good specific experience, your income will be higher, and, that will be for the rest of your life, and that will more than outweigh a little bit of amount of money you lost working full time at a minimum wage job instead of going to school, right? So the money spent on tuition and books, well, yes, because if you didn't go to school, you wouldn't have purchased those. So these are an opportunity cost. Again, these are things that you think the benefits would outweigh in the long run. What about money spent on your smartphone? So no, because you likely would have had a smartphone anyways. Unless you would have only bought a smartphone for going to school, which I wouldn't believe, then it's not going to be an opportunity cost. And then what about your satisfaction or, any of the positive benefits from learning while you're in school? Is that an opportunity cost? No, you're right. That's actually the benefit, not cost. Okay, so the next concept we're going to talk about is the production possibilities curve. This item here actually nicely summarizes these concepts that we just learned. So it will summarize scarcity, choices, and opportunity cost. So it's again a very simple model, and it illustrates those important concepts that we just talked about. There's three assumptions based on this simple production possibility model. For simplicity, we're just thinking about two products. So if we assume there's some economy and they only produce two products, then it keeps it simple so we can draw it on a two-dimensional diagram. Of course, the ideas are generalizable to any number of goods, but it gives us a good framework to think about things in. And in this model, we have that resource quantity and available technology are fixed. So it's kind of a static model. So we're just looking at it at a specific point in time. And the other assumption is that all resources are employed to their fullest capacity. That would be if we're on the bound. We'll see. So this production possibility curves, all it does is simply show the range of possible output combinations or choices for an economy. And as I said, it highlights scarcity of resources, and let me just go back there. It has a concave shape, which reflects the law of increasing opportunity cost. And I'll highlight that in a moment, explain it in a moment. So let's look at a diagram of one of these things. So first, we have a production possibility schedule. Now, when we use the word schedule, we're just talking about the data being in a table. And if we put this data if we plot this data, then this would be the production possibilities curve. Okay, so here, this outlines the production possibilities for a hypothetical economy that has hamburgers and computers. Not the best example, I didn't make it, but we'll go with it. So what we're saying here is that if all of the scarce resources in this economy were dedicated toward making hamburgers, then they would be able to produce 1,000 hamburgers. Okay, and obviously if all their resources are dedicated to hamburgers, they're not going to be producing any computer. Now, if they want to make one computer, then they have to give up the resources associated with 100 hamburgers. And we can keep going. And then at the bottom here, if they put all of their resources into making computers, they'd only be able to make 3. And then obviously, if they're putting all their resources into computers, they wouldn't be hamburgers. So let's put this on a diagram. So let's plot these points. So point A is going to be right here, right? It's going to be where we have 1,000 hamburgers and 0 computers. Point B is going to be here. Point C is going to be here. And point D is going to be here. So we're just plotting these. Now, you'll notice that this isn't a line. It has this concave to the origin shape. Now, let's talk about why we would draw it like that. So again, we're choosing to draw this a certain way. We're not just doing this randomly. We have a reason for that. The reason is that we tend to believe in reality, in most cases, that the resources, or the scarce resources, so land, capital, labor, those things aren't always equally suited to produce either of the goods in an economy. Okay, so let's say we start here. So we're here, we have 1,000 hamburgers. Now, if we want to make one computer, we have to give up 100 hamburgers. So here, this vertical distance is illustrating the opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost of one computer is 100 hamburgers. Okay, now we're also assuming we're going to be efficient. So that was one of the assumptions for this thing. And so if we're going to make one computer, we're going to take resources away from hamburger production that are going to be of least cost. We're not going to take people who are really good at hamburger production and have them make computers. We're going to take people who maybe are more inclined to be better at computers and not as good as hamburgers. So in that case, we're not giving up that much. We're giving up a bit, but we're not giving up that much when we go to point B. But as we move forward to the right and make more computers, we're going to have to give up more, because we're going to have to take resources that are good in hamburger production and have them being used in computer production. Okay, and so the opportunity cost now for another computer is going to be 300. So the opportunity cost here is 100. Now the opportunity cost is going to be I'll go back. Now the opportunity cost is going to be 300. And now if we want to make the third computer, we have to give up 600 hamburgers. So this is the law of increasing opportunity cost. It's just the assumption that resources aren't equally suitable in either sector. So we're going to take away the least suitable ones at first. And so our opportunity costs are going to be low at first, but then they're going to start getting higher and higher, because we're going to have to take away resources that are really good and suitable for this sector and have them in the other sector. Okay, so someone's asking why 100 hamburgers for one computer is not clear. So again, if we go from point A to point B, at point A we have 1,000 hamburgers, 0 computer. And again, this is showing us our production possibilities. Okay, so this is telling us that if we want to make one computer, we have to give up 100 hamburgers. Okay, and if we want to make another computer, we have to give up 300. If we want to make another computer, we have to give up 600. So another thing to point out here is any points in the boundary here, below the boundary, would be inefficient. So this economy can produce this point, it could produce one computer and maybe roughly 500 hamburgers, but it could also produce one computer and 900 hamburgers. So any points below here are inefficient. So if we were thinking of an economy in a recession, we would be inside of our production possibilities curve, because we would not, in a recession, we're not utilizing all of our labor resources. People are unemployed. And a point obviously like F is unattainable. Given the resources in this economy, they cannot produce 2 computers and 900 hamburgers. It's not possible given their scarce resources. So points such as F would be unobtainable. So we'll just go over that again. So if we look at point B and then point C, to get that extra computer, we have to give up 300 hamburgers. And so this is the opportunity cost of one computer. So again, the production possibility curves illustrates opportunity cost. It also illustrates scarcity because we can't get points above here. And clearly it indicates choices, right? We have choices. If, we choose to go from point A to B, we have to give up 100 hamburgers. From B to C, we saw it was 300. And from C to D, we saw that it was 600. Okay. And just to reinforce it, if the opportunity costs are increasing like this, then it's because of the law of increasing opportunity costs, which just is an assumption. We're just saying, we're going to represent this as a concave curve to the origin. And when we do that, it's because we believe that resources aren't equally suited to either sector. And that's why it would look like this. If we drew a linear production possibilities curve, then we are making the assumption that the resources are equally suitable in each good. So you're not going to have, the opportunity cost then would be constant throughout. So there might be certain situations where that's true. Maybe if we're thinking of a deserted island and the only two goods are coconuts and bananas, and each person is equally capable or skilled in collecting either of those two goods, then we might see a linear production possibility. But more realistically, there would be a curve. And so, it's just a nice, simple little model that gives us a framework to think about the economic problem in, gives us a framework to think about scarcity, opportunity cost, and choices. So we have a question. What if the two production units are perfectly matched in terms of required resources? So that's basically what I was saying. If the resources were equally suited in producing either of the two goods, then this would be linear. Okay, let's talk about economic growth. So we can illustrate economic growth with the production possibilities curve as well. So what do you think economic growth, if I wanted to represent economic growth, what would I do to the production possibilities curve? Okay, so let's talk about a contraction. So economic growth is when the production possibility curve shifts outwards. So but it depends, right? If it could be a parallel shift, it could rotate on the bottom, it could rotate on the left. If there is some, say, new improvement in technology that is equally useful in either of the two sectors, then we would represent that with a parallel shift in the production possibilities curve. If you think just abstractly, think of what the production possibilities curve for Canada would have looked like 200 years ago, and then think about what it would look like now. Obviously, it's shifted a lot to the right since then because of technology. Back in the day, we used to have half of our population working in agriculture just to put food on the table, and and people worked long hours, sometimes 12, 16 hours a day. Nowadays, there's less than 3% of the population working in agriculture, and we have obesity problems. We have more food than we know what to do with. That's all because of technology. And so with this simple model, we would be representing changes like that with shifts outwards in the production possibilities curve. Okay, so economic growth occurs when we have some kind of a productivity increase that gives us the ability to produce more goods and services given the scarce resources that we have. Economic contraction is just the opposite, so we would just shift that inwards. So obviously the COVID-19 is a good example of that. It wasn't because of any problems with the economy being broken or anything. It's because the government decided that in order to prevent the spread of the disease, to shut everything down. Sorry, I should be more clear on that. Our economy did contract because of that, but our production possibilities in that sense did not change. We're just at a point within the production possibilities curve, an inefficient point, because we have resources that aren't being utilized. But if we were to think about actually shifting the production possibility curves inward, that would be something different. That would be something like a war or natural disaster that, say, destroyed a lot of the, it could destroy people, it could destroy infrastructure, plants, and that sort of thing. And so then, given all of that, say, destruction, then the production possibilities that we have would have diminished, and that's when we would shift it inwards. Okay, so if something happens that makes productivity increase equally in both sectors, then we shift it out to the right. If there was a technological improvement that increases productivity in computer production only, then we would just this would stay here, but we would rotate this out. It would rotating out to the left. And obviously, if there's some kind of a natural disaster, disease, famine, or something like that, that destroys our scarce resources that we use to produce stuff like capital, natural resources or people, then that's a shift inwards. So someone has a question, steeper the curve, more the contraction? I'm not quite sure about that. We're just, the worse the disaster, the more this would shift in. So, again, what we're doing here is we're just saying, how would we represent something like a natural disaster or some type of event that destroys some of our scarce resources that we use to produce goods and services? Well, we would represent that with our simple model with a shift inwards of this production possibilities curve. Okay, so that's all we're saying. So recession would actually not be a shift in this curve. It would be where we're operating at a point below the boundary, right? These are our production possibilities that occur if we're being efficient and using all of our resources. So a point like this means that we're not using some of our resources. In the case of a recession, usually we're not, we have people that are unemployed, so we're not using their labor. And so so someone's asking about the COVID-19 and the recession. So yes, that's correct. So with the COVID-19, it's the similar, we would represent that by having a point below our production possibility curve, right? Because nothing's really we didn't lose anything in terms of our ability to produce goods and services. We still have talented, skilled labor. We still have our factories. We still have our capital. We still have land. We still have natural resources. All that's still there. We're just not, using it all. We're at a point below our production possibilities. That's the same thing with a recession. Over the recession, this is a similar thing. Like the COVID-19 has caused a recession. A recession is meaning that we are producing less goods and services. That the amount that we're producing, our economic activity has fallen. So they're pretty much the same thing. But usually a recession is caused by something much different. Usually there's some kind of a bubble, a financial crisis. So usually there's something maybe kind of broken. There's some kind of situation that people are overextending themselves. People have borrowed too much, like the Great Depression. In that case, a lot of people had borrowed money to invest in the stock market because they kept thinking it would go up. So a lot of the wealth is based on borrowed money. And so then as soon as something went wrong, everyone had to sell and then the whole thing collapsed. But this is a bit different than that. This is sort of the government forcibly stopping production to avoid the disease from spreading. But how we would represent that in this model would be exactly the same. So someone said, but also, so are you guys having trouble hearing me or? All right. So anyways, I'll go on. So that's the idea. So we have a little simple model that illustrates these concepts. Again, it's just a nice framework to think about things in. You don't have to think about a particular image. You could think of thousands of goods. There's going to be something that's moving outwards or inwards. But this just gives you a nice framework to think about the big picture economy. So let's do a quick question here. So we have a situation where we have an island castaway who spends 8 hours each day acquiring 2 items, coconuts and fish. And this is the castaway's production possibility schedule. So we're assuming here that if this person put all of their effort in the day to collecting coconuts, they would be able to get 24, and then obviously 0 fish because they're not trying to catch any fish. On the other extreme, if they put all of their effort into catching fish, they would be able to catch 3 fish. And then there's these two, there's different combinations in between. So the question here says, from a starting point of production shown by scenario A, what is the castaway's opportunity cost catching the first fish? So can anyone answer that? Yeah, you can type it in your chat. Yeah, I see a lot of 4s. That's correct. So if this person makes the decision to use his scarce time, his labor effort, to catch 1 fish, then he will have to give up 4 coconuts. Okay. How much would he have to give up going from scenario B to C? Yep, 8. And then if he decides that, if he's currently at point C collecting 12 coconuts and 2 fish and decides that he just wants fish, how much coconuts would he have to give up? 12. And so we can see the law of increasing opportunity cost is present here. So we're basically saying this person, isn't as good at fishing as they are collecting coconuts. If he was equally productive in either one of these two, then we would have a linear production possibilities. And so that's the answer to question B. It's saying, do these results conform to the law of opportunity cost? Yes. We can see that the opportunity cost of fish increases as we increase the number of. So if we plotted this out, what shape would it have? Would it be linear or would it be concave to the origin? Yes, that's right. So all we're asking here is, what would this production possibilities curve look like? Well, since we just confirmed that the law of opportunity cost, of increasing opportunity cost is present, then it must have that concave shape. If it was a line, that would assume that the opportunity costs are constant, and so every time they catch a fish, they'd be giving up the same amount of coconuts. But that's not how that's not the issue. So, yes, we could redo this the other way around. So if we were to go from 0 coconuts, and then we were thinking about producing 1 coconut, how much fish we would have to give up, you would get a similar result where the opportunity cost would be increasing. But you'd have to redo the example to do that, because we're just given the information now as we go up by 1 increments for fish. If we go up by, we would need the data for going up 1 increments of coconuts or something where the distance between these two numbers are the same. So if we had like 10, 20, and 30, but we would have to work with fractions of fishes there. So that wouldn't be as convenient. But yes, it would work the other. And what assumptions must be met for the castaway to operate on his production possibilities curve? Well, the assumptions are that, there's a lot of assumptions. We're assuming obviously there's just 2 goods produced, and we assume that the quantity of the castaway's resources and the technology he uses are fixed. Otherwise, if they change, then we would be shifting the production possibility curve, so we'd have a new one. And we're also assuming his resources are employed to their full capacity. So here, the only resources are, the coconuts and fish and the labor effort that the person uses. If, for example, this person maybe took a day off and foregone some consumption that day to build a fishing rod or a fishing net, so that would be an example of saving, and then using savings in the sense that you're foregoing consumption and then producing a capital good like a fishing net. Then you would be able to catch more fish. So in that case, we would have a shift in the production possibilities curve, and it would actually be it would just rotate. It wouldn't shift parallel, it would just rotate along the bottom where fish is, because now he would be able to catch more fish for any given unit. What happens to the castaway's production possibilities curve if he works for 12 hours instead of 8 each day? So how would we represent that? So clearly we would represent, that's almost as if we have a new scarce resource. So for whatever, maybe he's healthier now or something like that and is able to spend more time per day, well, then obviously it would be a parallel shift. Yeah, you would just, well, I don't know about doubling everything. We don't know exactly. We just know he has more time, and with more time, he should be able to collect more coconuts and fish. We don't know exactly how much, but we know there would be some kind of if we assume that the time, if we assume that those extra hours will be equally productive in either of these two, then we would just have it shift parallel. And if he works less, then it's a shift inwards. And what happens to the castaway's production possibility curve if he manages to make a fishing rod, which he then uses successfully to catch fish? So that would be, let me use the annotation tool here. Then we would have something like this. This would be fish. This is coconuts. And so if he has a fishing rod and he puts all of his effort into collecting coconuts, he's still going to be able to get the same amount of coconuts, right? So this isn't going to change, but he's going to be able to catch more fish. So it would be, something like this. It would rotate over to the right. I apologize, I'm not the best drawer with this tool, and it's not giving me an option to change the color either. So anyways, I think you get the point. Yes, that's a good question. The opportunity costs would be affected because it's easier for this person to catch fish now, so he wouldn't have to give up as much coconuts when he does go to catch fish, right? So if, say for example, with the fishing rod, he can go out for 1 hour and collect 10 fish, well then, that's pretty impressive. So then for 1 unit of fish, he's not going to have to give up as much coconut. So yes, that would reduce the opportunity. Good question. Okay, so let's move on here. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 3 basic economic questions, and all of this stuff is related. Suppose our class was stranded on a deserted island, right? As a group, we're going to have to answer 3 basic economic questions. The first question is what to produce. So of course, if we're stranded on an island, we're probably going to decide on food and shelter. Then we need to also decide how we're going to produce it, right? We need to know what wood we're going to use. This is where we would be thinking too about who has certain skills among us. If someone in our class was very good at gardening or something like that, then we'd probably want them to be producing food. If someone has skills in carpentry, then they would want to, we'd want to have them making shelter. And then now let's suppose we're successful at doing that. We have all kinds of different huts. We have lots of food that we've grown or gathered. The other question is, how do we divide that up? Should the people who worked harder get more? Should people who have nice haircuts get, how do you make that decision? And, essentially we're asking here how the economic pie is divided. So any economy, any society actually with people on it has to answer these questions, right? Now, there's different variations in how these questions can be answered. So an economic system is actually what would answer these questions. Now, we're going to look at 3 economic systems. There's the traditional economic system. So this sort of focuses on long time ago in history. So we're talking here about maybe isolated communities or something like that, where, you can think of the son would do the occupation of the father, the daughter would do the occupation of the mother, that sort of thing. That's not too much prevalent anymore. The other big one is a market economy. And so in a market economy, we have consumer center. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but one economic system is a market system, and then the other one would be a command system. So a market system is basically decentralized. There's some basic property rights. So people, there's legal institutions to protect people from having their anything they own from being stolen. And then people just voluntarily trade with each other. So if a firm decides to open up and use our scarce resources to produce something we don't want or need, then in a market system, they'll just go out of business and that will stop. In a command economy, this is a much different system. So it's, instead of being decentralized like a market system, it's top down. It's more of a top down approach where the government actually explicitly outlines an economic plan. So as you can see, each of these different economic systems will answer those three questions. Oh, that's a good point. Someone just mentioned like maybe an Amish community. Yeah, that's a good point. That would maybe be something like a traditional economy, from my understanding. I'm not sure. There might be little elements of market within, but I think that's a good example. So let's talk about that. So a traditional economy, how does it answer these questions? So, basically there's habits and customs that would be involved here. So, the how to produce would be the way it's always been done. Maybe children work the same jobs their parents have. Back in traditional economies, it was, the technology was so low that most of the production was, people would work most of the day just to put food on the table, right? So that was primarily all, the occupations were simple, hunter, maybe there was someone that could make weapons. It's just a very simple economy. So that would be a traditional economy. More interesting would be the market system. And this is sort of what we're used to. So in a market system, you have, a basic set of arrangements, like property rights. A legal system that protects property rights is one of the key essentials. And because without that, no one would produce anything if it could just get stolen, or you wouldn't have any rights to that property, right? So you need property rights, and then you just have voluntary buying and selling, but mutually benefit, people just engaging in voluntary trade. Okay. So the individuals are free to pursue their own self-interest, and that's the main key thing here. It's just voluntary trade. You have simple property rights set up, and this is also sometimes referred to as capitalism. So here the government would be minimal. Of course, I'm sort of talking here about the purest form of a market system. In the purest form of a market system, there would be only government involvement insofar as they provide political and legal institutions that would be necessary to have the market be successfully operated. So how would these three questions be answered in a market system? So I'm actually I'll go back for a sec, but let's think about how the three questions would be answered here. So what to produce? Well, what to produce is answered indirectly through our purchasing decisions, right? If someone makes something and no one wants it, they're not going to be making it anymore because they won't make any profit. So that's how the what to produce gets produced. So it's very linked to what the people in the society want. What the people want will be what is produced. Now, how to produce? Well, in a market system, the firms themselves will figure that out. And there's going to be an incentive for them to not waste scarce resources because they won't make profit, right? So there's an incentive here to be efficient and to produce things in, the most cost-effective way. And then the for whom question is a little more tricky to answer. How do the incomes, so our share of the economic pie, get determined? Well, generally we could say the supply and demand for our skills, but there's lots of exceptions to that. Some people make $1 million a year, some people make 20,000 a year. For the most part, a lot of it is depending on what skills they have and how. If you have a very rare skill and there's a lot of demand for it, maybe like a professional sports player, then you can make a lot of money. But so it's a little bit. There's a lot of exceptions. There's not a hard and fast rule for that, but generally we can think of the supply and demand for your particular skills. Because in a market system, there's not only the goods market, there's the factor market, or the labor market if we're thinking of humans, right? And work, we trade our labor for a wage. So the high, the more scarce our skill and the higher the demand for it, the more we will get rewarded generally. But there are still some people who have lots of money that maybe don't have the most, there's lots of exceptions to that. There are things like unions, which are non-market activities, which can result in higher wages despite the supply and demand issue. So this figure here just shows you a basic overview of a market system. In a market system, we have the factor or resource markets. In this market, this is where households trade their, so households own their labor, humans own the factors of production. So humans own their labor, humans own capital, humans own land, etc. They trade that for income from businesses. So the households, for example, will provide a business with labor, and in return, the business will provide them with wages. Okay, that's the resource market. In the product market, businesses will produce products in return for money, consumer spending. So this is just a brief overview. We'll get into this a little more when we go into the macroeconomics part of the course. So some of the benefits of a market economy are consumer sovereignty. As I said, the decision of what to produce is ultimately decided indirectly by households through their purchasing behavior. You could think of your decision to spend your money as sort of like a vote. So when, if a lot of people want to buy something, that's a lot of votes to have that product still be offered for sale. And the biggest benefit, probably the reason, if you look at human history, the only market system that's been able to give us a very high, a lot of people a very high standard of living is the market system. And likely this is because it has a built-in mechanism that ensures efficiency. It ensures that our scarce resources are not wasted, and it also promotes innovation. So the two key things are profit and competition. Now, if we look at a command system, we'll see in a command system in a moment, these two things aren't present. And we see that the standard of living in those systems, likely as a result, are very low. Now, there are a lot of good things about a market economy. It is like this little engine that just creates wealth, but, there's obviously a lot of drawback. There's an unequal income distribution, pollution and things like that can become a problem. There's no profit in cleaning up a pollution or environmental damage that you did. It can be unstable at times. In a command economy, the government plans the economy, right? So it doesn't plan for unemployment. So there's no unemployment unless the government plans for there to be unemployment. In a market system, there's no top-down planning. So you can end up with instability, recessions, and unemployment. There's lots of other things like unfair competitive practices, mistreatment of employees. Again, you have this sort of machine that just cares about making profit. So, there's things that can happen that are not good that will be a consequence of them just caring about profit. So there's obviously a large role for government in a market economy if we believe as a society we don't want some of these things. And the government obviously tries to reduce instability in the business cycle as much as they can. We've seen this in the financial crisis, and now with this COVID-19, immediately the governments in most countries increase government spending, and they also do the appropriate monetary policy to stimulate the economy. So they try and stimulate the economy in recessions, and if the economy's maybe getting overheated and inflation is becoming a concern, they'll try to slow down the economy. So there's a lot of government involvement in our economy. So there's not really any pure market economies. There's always usually quite a bit of government involvement, more so in some countries than others, but still we're more of a mixed economy as well. So the majority of the production of goods and services, maybe something like 70%, is done in the private sector, private market, but still, education, healthcare, military, all of those things, that is sort of a command system that's all directed by and planned by the government. So a command system is essentially you have total control from the government. It's sort of a top-down system. The government comes up with a central plan and directs how all economic resources will be used. So in terms of our three questions, they explicitly answer these questions. They say exactly what will be produced, they say exactly how it will be produced, and they explicitly say how it will be divided up. So in many of the countries like Cuba, North Korea, or the former Soviet Union, East Germany, there's probably some exceptions, but generally the idea was that the people were to get paid somewhat equally. Okay, so it was this sort of communist idea. And the government decided exactly what would be produced and how it will be produced. In fact, all of the means of production were owned by the government in these types of systems. So one of the benefits of this type of system is that, you have direct control over the income distribution and the allocation of capital goods. And, that could, if you wanted to promote economic development, if the government decided it wants to have a really good bicycle sector, then it could just make that decision. The decision is very direct and easy to do. And in this type of system, you don't have business cycles because you're not going to plan for them, right? Everything's planned. So you're not going to plan for unemployment, plan for business cycles. So it could be stable. Now there's major drawbacks. Now the problem is if you're paying everyone the same thing, but not everyone is actually equal. Not everyone has the same preferences. So there's issues there. And if everyone's paid this, if there's no incentive to work hard, that there's all kinds of misplaced incentives in this type of system, which results in a lot of inefficiency. There's not much economic freedom. The big issue is that in a command economy, there's no profit motive. So if the government could decide to make some strange thing like polka dot yellow pants because some bureaucrat in the government decides that people will like them, and then they will get made, and so our scarce resources will be used to make those even though nobody wants them, and that could go on for a very, very long time. But in a market system that would stop immediately because no one would buy them. Our votes as a consumer would be zero, and whoever's doing that, wasting our scarce resources, will stop because they're not going to make a profit. It's a built-in mechanism. But in a command system, you don't have that. So was many examples of how do you, if you need to have an incentive, so these people were guaranteed jobs. So there's just no incentive to work hard. The quality of the products were apparently terrible because you have to buy from them. It doesn't matter if they do a good job or not because you have to buy from the government stores. So there's all kinds of issues with this. And another big thing is, how do you know, maybe this would work okay with an economy of 100 people, but how do you know what millions of people want? Think about sitting down and writing up what everyone wants. That's not, and then not only, it's not only not very difficult to do, it's also very inefficient too, because you have all of these people hired, so all of those labor resources being wasted on trying to come up with a plan of what everyone wants. And then we know in a market system, you don't need to do that. Things will figure themselves out. So just in terms of a summary, so a command system is top down. The government explicitly answers these questions, and it scores very poorly on efficiency because mainly of misplaced incentives. In a market system, there's no central economic plan. It's decentralized, bottom up. Producers are privately owned, and the consumers sort of answer these questions indirectly. Well, the what to produce is answered indirectly through sort of our votes as a consumer. The how to produce is determined by the private firms, and they have an incentive to do it in an efficient way. And the labor market generally determines how the economic pie is split up. And the negative issue of a market system is this isn't equally split up, and there's many, especially like the US, the inequality is very high. And so in terms of efficiency, it scores very strong, and that's because of the competition and profit motive. Another thing just to point out, even in a pure market system, if you had as pure as you can get of a market system, you could have the strongest firms survive, and then you end up with a bunch of monopolies and no competition, and that wouldn't be a good thing. Maybe it might be better than a command system, I'm not sure, but in that case, you're not going to have competition, and so then you can, these companies can take advantage of consumers, use their market power in not so good of a way. So that's why it's important to have competition, and in most countries there's a government agency that is responsible for trying to promote competition. In Canada, it's the Competition Bureau. So if companies have get too big or too strong, and it looks like they may be abusing their market power, they'll get involved. For example, if two of the large banks want to merge with each other, they're not allowed to do that. They need to get approval from the Competition Bureau because it could unduly reduce competition if they were to merge. So most economies, as I said, are mixed economies because there's there's usually a sizable government sector. There's no examples that I know of a pure market economy. So this is just a sort of a range. So we have traditional economy, market economy, and command economy. So North Korea, I'm not sure why Cuba isn't here. Cuba would be here. They're very close to being, and if you've been to Cuba on vacation, you can clearly see it's quite different than here. You can see the command economy in action. There's been some minor loosenings and moved a little bit. There's some smaller market advances going on there, but it's still quite it's a very conical idea of what a command economy would look like. And then you have, United States, Canada would be over here. We're not a pure market economy. There's still a lot of role of government, but for the most part, consumer goods, food, and things like that, generally it's all privatized. And then, Sweden maybe would be more over to the right. They have a little more government involvement. They have higher taxes, that sort of thing. So, they're a little more, I guess you could say, socialist than maybe Canada or United States. And then you have, this is mentioning India and China as being maybe some elements still of traditional. These countries are growing extremely fast, so I'm not sure how these might be more up towards top now, and probably will be at some point, in the future. So economic goals. So there's if you're thinking of what are some important goals that the economy should have, efficiency is obviously important because it directly translates to a higher standard of living. Income inequality could be another goal depending on the country. Some countries, like a lot of people in the U.S. don't mind having high inequality. Scandinavian countries would be more bothered by that. Price stability is important. We'll learn about that later in the course. We'd like to have as many people working as possible. A viable balance of payments. We'll talk more about that later in the course. Economic growth, of course, is very important. This translates into higher standard of living. And we like to do all of these things and, still be friendly to the environment. There are obviously some goals that are complementary and some that are conflicting. An example where we have a complementary goals is between full employment. If we want full employment then, and we also want economic growth, well, they go hand in hand. But if we want price stability and full employment, that there could be issues there in some cases, because maybe in order to, if you stimulate the economy too much, you could end up causing inflation. Again, we'll talk more about inflation in the macro section, of course. So let's just finish up with some multiple choice questions. So which of the following is not considered to be an advantage of the market type of economic system? Okay, anyone? Yeah. E. So the answer here is E. Its economic benefits are spread quite evenly among its people. We know that that's not true. So one of the negative aspects of a market economy is that it can produce high levels of inequality. A company's decision to introduce a new green car that is designed to appeal to consumers who are concerned about the environment. That's an example of, don't get tricked here. So I'll give you a hint. The answer is not C. Yeah, the answer is A. So the what to produce decision relates to how should we be using our scarce resources to produce goods, and like what should we be producing with our scarce resources. And so here, because there's a lot of consumers who want green cars, this company is making green cars for the consumer. The for whom question is about sharing the economic pie or redistributing the economic pie. In a market type system, which of the following best describes how the production of goods and services are decided? Okay, so here, how the production of goods and services is decided. So do consumers, do we have a say in how McDonald's produces their hamburgers? Not really. So the answer here to this question is B. So the actual decisions regarding the production methods goods are to be, the firms make those decisions themselves, the private firms, not the government. And there's an incentive for them to be efficient at it. D is the answer if this question was the what to produce. So the what to produce question is indirectly answered by consumers through their demand or purchasing behavior. A market system type of economy is one in which most economic decisions are made by consumers and privately owned businesses. No economic decisions are made in a decentralized manner. Private and government decision makers have an equal influence on economic decisions, or the dominant influence is the government. So yeah, clearly I see a bunch of A's on the screen, and you guys are right. Yeah. Let's suppose a government makes a decision to increase income taxes on high-income Canadians and reduce it for low-income Canadians, and then increase the financial support for unemployed Canadians. What of the three questions does this relate to? Is this talking anything about how we should use what goods and services we should produce from our scarce resources? Nope. Is this at all talking about how to produce? So the decision of the private firms on how to produce a particular good? No. So which one must it be? Yeah, it must be C. So here, again, if you think back to my example of the deserted island, we make our shelter, we have food. The for whom question is, how do we divide this up? Who gets what? And the economic pie is what we produced, our huts and shelter and food. And so we're talking about dividing it up. So this question here is basically saying we're going to sort of redistribute the economic pie among people. So this is related closest to the for whom to produce decision. Okay, so make sure you read chapter 1 in the textbook. Here are some suggested end of problem questions, and make sure you get registered in Connect and do your pre-class quiz for next week. All right, that concludes our lecture for today. I'll open it up to see if there's any questions. Okay, great. If there are any questions, you can always send me an email. So thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. Take care and have a good night. Oh, yeah, I noticed the question. Yes, all of the lecture slides, in case you joined late, all of the lecture slides are posted on Slate. You'll find them all there. They're already there now. Okay, great. Thanks again, and have a good day.